To you who once called home mountains, plains, and forests, a social animal, fierce, proud, wandering with free reins. Your pack was your life, hunting party, nighttime security. You always felt at peace, tucked in with the family. Time proved our chemistry was much more than a trend. Now, they even say that you're my closest friend. I taught you to protect us and to guide our way. From you I learned the true meaning of love, trust, and play. Nowadays your pack has evolved in nature. You've become accustomed to a different pasture, far away from your own and the peace of a tribe, in a world emitting a hectic hustle vibe. I realized changes could be hard on you. I'll do my best to see your needs attended to. You, my dog, my friend, my faithful companion. You deserve to be happy. It's my #1 mission.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our talk on pheromones. Our title is Pheromones, All in the Nose or Not, and our subtitle, The Science of Canine Wellbeing. Madeleine, did you first want to talk? Sorry.
No, just shortly, the webinar will be recorded and we'll send a replay through tomorrow. If there's any veterinarians attending, they can just request a CPD register, but the last one is on 7 May will have a CPD registered as well. That is all. Quixie, over to you.
Okay, we'll just share the screen first.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was because it's open on my screen. Okay, here we go.
So while we're getting our technology sorted, you just saw Dr. Aileen Pipers on the screen, and my name is Quixie Sontag. We are both vets and very interested in animal behavior. And we'd like to share some really exciting information with you this evening about pheromones and a really good product that is available in this field. So I've introduced our speakers. You, the participants, are the most important part of this evening's event. Most of you are either a behaviorist or from a welfare organization or a pet parent. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for spending your time with us this evening. We really look forward to that. Then we also have representatives here from the company Siva, who makes the product Adactyl that we will talk about a little bit later, and I think they will become apparent as the evening goes on, but there is Rwanda and Haneli, and I think they are the main representatives of Siva this evening. The format of the presentation is fairly informal. We'll have a few slides and discuss a few topics and then have a little bit of a discussion to find out what you think about what we've said and to perhaps clarify anything that's not clear. So there'll be several opportunities for questions and answers, but we would also like you to please post your questions in the Q&A box. Try and keep the chat for the chat box. There are 2 boxes, and the real serious questions into the Q&A section. We did receive some questions from some of you before this evening, and we have included those questions in the presentation. We do want to make it clear, though, that we will not have the time to really justify the kind of cases that you've asked questions about. All we'll be able to do is just to give you a very brief idea of how to use pheromones or not use pheromones in those cases. And we do want to ask that in the Q&A, you don't ask about specific cases. Those of you that are behaviorists will know that each one-line question really requires a half an hour discussion before one can even get to an answer. So we'll be focusing on principles that will apply to various similar types of cases, and not looking at the exact detail of each case that you present to us. So I think we'll go on to the sections of our talk. There's 4 sections. We're going to start off with an introductory explanation of canine fear, anxiety, and stress, and just explain what the terms mean. We're going to look at behavior as part of holistic care for animals. The physiology of pheromones will be explained, and then how these products can be used in behavior management. So section 1 on canine fear, anxiety, and stress will be presented by my colleague Aileen, and then we'll take turns with the rest of the sections. So over to you, Aileen.
Thanks, Quixie. So I just want to double check. If I put the questions onto my second screen, can you guys see that box with the questions in? I don't want it to interfere with what you're seeing.
No,
okay, perfect. Okay. Right, so we're going to start off talking about some definitions, because it's always important to be on the same page with regards to definitions when we are talking about things like fear, anxiety, and stress, because these can be quite ubiquitous terms. So let's start off with fear. So fear is an emotional response, and I think it's not one that we need to discuss in too much detail, except to perhaps say that it can be adaptive or normal, right? If we weren't ever fearful of something, we wouldn't last very long. So fear has an important role in teaching us about what is dangerous and what is not. And fear is related to the presence or proximity of a specific stimulus. So there must be something that is causing the fear. And it's directional. So what the dog is looking at, what they are trying to avoid, that is the thing that is creating the fear. And probably the most important aspect here is that it is how it is perceived as a threat or danger. So it's important to note that the animal is perceiving it as a threat. So very quickly, you can use the little emojis that are part of Zoom. You are scared of spiders. Can you please just give a thumbs up? Okay, I can see I can see many more coming through. Okay, so for those of you who are not scared of spiders, do you think that those of us who are scared of spiders are in any actual danger from a large rain spider? I mean, I know spiders can bite, but rain spiders are not poisonous. So for those of us who are scared of spiders, do we think that we're in any danger from a large rain spider? I don't think I'm in any danger, but I'm still very scared of spiders. The thought of them coming near me or touching me induces an extreme kind of sense of fear. So that is very important. A pet parent might think that it's unreasonable for their pet to be scared of the vacuum or the blender or a visitor coming into the home. But what's important is what the pet is perceiving, what the dog is perceiving as being something scary. So if you think about a very practical example, most people greet dogs by bending towards them and stretching out their hand, thinking that this is a very friendly gesture. However, a number of dogs perceive this as very frightening. So here you can see perhaps the perspective that the dog has for that person reaching out their hand and bending over towards them. And those of you who've ever looked into Dr. Sophia Yin's work or used any of her resources will recognize that this is a picture from her. I think a very effective one that demonstrates that. Next, we have phobia. So phobia is a profound, excessive, abnormal fear response and is generally without the presence of a true threat. Or fear can be like that too. But most importantly, out of proportion to the level, to the response that's actually needed for dealing with that threat. So phobias interfere with normal behavior. They have a threshold point, and beyond that, the response is unrelated to the intensity. So dogs who are scared of thunderstorms, it's not like they are a little bit scared and then as the thunderstorm gets more intense, they become more scared and more scared and more scared, right? Some dogs might have that as a fear response, but dogs who have a true thunderstorm phobia will reach a point beyond which, you know, the intensity of the storm no longer impacts their response. They are freaking out, even if the thunder is maybe still far off in the distance and sort of barely audible. And another factor is that the response persists long after the actual threat has ceased, right? So the thunderstorm has gone and the dog is still sitting, shaking in a corner, pacing up and down, panting, you know, trying to escape somewhere. Now, anxiety is a very important definition to get into because it's one that I think gets used very generally and not always as it was meant to be used. And it's defined as the apprehensive anticipation of threat. So it is a more general state of distress. It is longer lasting. As I said earlier, fear is related to a specific stimulus. You can generally, you know, pinpoint what that stimulus is. Whereas anxiety is prompted by less explicit or more generalized cues and involves physiological arousal. And we're going to get a little bit into that physiological arousal a bit later, but essentially there is something going on in the dog's body, right? So physical response that is linked to this emotional state, this mental emotional state of anxiety. And anxiety is often without organized functional behavior. So if you think about a typical fear response, there is fight, flight, freeze, or fiddle. You know, there's something that the animal is doing to attempt to deal with the thing that is scaring them. With anxiety, it's seemingly the behavior that they're engaging in is seemingly not something that is going to resolve the problem. So, for instance, they're just pacing around the house while you're getting ready to leave and you're picking up your keys and your handbag and they're pacing around and panting. They're not actually, you know, trying to go with you or trying to prevent you from leaving. They're just feeling very anxious about the impending alone time that they know is going to accompany you walking out of the door. And we do this as well, all right? So if you think about the times that you maybe chew your nails, you know, tap your fingers, shake your leg, twirl your hair, you know, there's lots of little things that we do when we're feeling a little bit anxious as a way to kind of self-soothe or calm ourselves down. And then stress. Stress is a term that we use to describe the body's response to stressors. And in that response, the body releases stress hormones. So stresses can be anything that is challenging in the internal or external environment. So it can be something outside of the dog's body, so something happening in the environment that's perceived as being stressful and creates a stress response, or it can be something internal. So if we think about the mental states of anxiety, anxiety is linked to a stress response. The animal is feeling anxious, so we have a stress response occurring in the body. So anxiety, fear, and phobias are all stresses. Equally, lots of stress all the time can cause anxiety, can cause the mental state of anxiety to become present for that animal. But not all stress is bad. So we talk about eustress being healthy stress. So that's EU, not YOU. So eustress is healthy stress, and it's positive, motivating, and adaptive, right? If you think about times where you have to do something important, like now giving a presentation to an audience, the little bit of stress that is generated within my body releases those stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, and those have a way of sharpening focus, getting the brain to focus on what's important. You know, I shouldn't be listening to noises that are going on in the background because I'm focused on what's happening here now. So those hormones are helping my brain to pay attention to the things that are important. When stress becomes more than what the animal can cope with behaviorally, then we have the state of distress. So that becomes stress that impairs functioning. And we know that distress, particularly over a long period of time, has many health impacts for the animal and can affect them physically as well, both for humans and for animals. All right, so we get to our first discussion of the evening. How do we know that a dog is experiencing anxiety or stress? So this you can pop into the chat box and you can just give your examples of what you think. If anybody would like to come off of mute and speak, we can just put up your hand and Madeleine will allow that for you. Okay, so Rwanda said hiding when visitors come over. Body language, absolutely. So Rwanda, if I were to characterize your example, that would be behavior, right? Okay, Shannon saying behaviors or actions out of context, body language and vocalization. Gillian said tail between the legs, which is definitely body language. Right, I'm just allowing a little bit of time for the people who are slower typers. Okay, don't think anything more is coming through. Right, so that's perfect, right? Body language and vocalizations and behavior are always. Moira has added tension in ears and facial expression. Jeanette has said cowering or ears, growling and shaking. And then, yes, Rhonda has said panting, trembling. So that's the other thing I was looking for is changes in physiology, right? So dilated pupils, panting, increased heart rate, sweaty paws. Those are all changes that occur in the dog's physiology that indicate a state of anxiety or stress. Right, so let's quickly look at a list of commonly recognized non-specific, and that word non-specific means that these things are not specific to anxiety. They can be visible in other contexts. So non-specific signs of anxiety in dogs. And as you can see, it is quite an extensive list. And again, if we go back to the things that we have just discussed, we could broadly divide these up into vocalizations, behaviors, body language, and then changes in physiology. And obviously, the context of these events is important. So what has happened just before that? If you've gotten a treat out the cupboard and your dog starts licking their lips, it's probably because their mouth is starting to water because they are anticipating the treat that they're about to get. However, if you are trying to greet a dog and they are turning their head away from you and also licking their lips, those are both indications that they are a little bit anxious or nervous about the interaction. You also want to look at the overall picture. So, you know, one sign on its own isn't necessarily indicative of a mental state. we have to put a couple of things together. And this is probably where people also get a bit confused, especially around body language. We need to be looking at the whole picture of the dog, the various body language indicators that they're showing us, and not just one thing, such as, years going back. That can be, related to a number of different experiences that the dog is having. And then we also want to maybe compare the individuals in a group. So if you have got a group of dogs in a kennel environment, and the majority of them are at the gate, sort of trying to interact with people, and sort of maybe jumping up at the gate or barking, and then you've got one individual who is hiding away or going, cowering or looking, showing body language that looks very sort of fearful, then we can use that information to build a picture of how that dog is feeling. Jimmy is asking, what is mydriasis? So mydriasis is dilated pupils. So when we have adrenaline release in the body, one of the things that adrenaline does is it dilates the pupils. It also increases the heart rate, the respiratory rate. It also redirects blood flow away from the digestive organs to the muscles. And essentially everything that adrenaline is doing is preparing the body to fight or flee, right? To get out of that scary situation. Jeanette is saying emotional state is so important. Yes, absolutely. Alette has mentioned whale eye. Yes, and it should be on here somewhere. So sometimes you get whale eye with the combination of these two things. Wait, let me just move my mouse so that you guys can see what I'm pointing at. So inability to meet a direct gaze and lowering of the head and neck. Those two things together often give us whale eye. I don't know if, can you guys see me at all? Or because I like to make facial expressions, but I don't want to make facial expressions if nobody can see me.
We can.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we get whale eye because the dog is trying to watch what is scaring them, but also turn their head away. And so then by doing that, then you get this whale eye because of both the combination of them looking and turning their head away at the same time. All right. So our next discussion point is, are we missing signs of stress in dogs, and how can we become more aware? I'm going to pretend that I can hear like lots of keys clickety clacking away. Okay, so Shannon has said spend time getting to know a dog's baseline relaxed behavior. That's important, yes, because sometimes that can differ, right, between different dogs. Janine is saying pay attention to behavior. Nadine saying you should be aware of anything of your dog's unusual behavior. So I'm assuming, Nadine, that you mean usual, and then therefore you can tell what is unusual. Sorry, Sherry had just before Sherry Unle said by looking at every part of the dog's body, because every part talks. Yes, indeed, that body language. Although I'm sure those of you who have who pay a lot of attention to body language, if you perhaps remember a time when you didn't know what you know now about body language, and how when you learned that language, it was like a whole new world opened up, right? Because that's certainly what it was like for me. When I started to learn what I should be looking at, I was amazed that I had not seen all those things previously. And the more attention I started to pay to body language, the more I started to see these really subtle interactions between dogs and people. And it's amazing. Sherry is saying stress is always overlooked. Yawning is perceived as being tired. Yes, absolutely. And Sherry, and that's important, is that sometimes we need to separate out when the dog is actually tired, because sometimes if an interaction has been taxing. The dog has had to inhibit their behavior, or be polite with another dog who's perhaps been overly boisterous with them, or tolerate lots of people sort of touching them. They might be yawning because they are actually tired, because that interaction took a lot out of them. It took a lot of emotional input. So on the one hand, yes, yawning can be an indication that they're a bit stressed, so a little bit of a fiddle response, but it can also be because just the engagement that they've had has actually been tiring. Alette has also said some dogs are good at hiding their behavior, and only if you know the dog or breed. And I think that's an incredibly important point that you've brought up, Alette, because especially if we think about how we have changed the facial features and the body features of dogs, that is quite important, because instead of being able to see their eyes with dogs that have very hairy fringes, we might not be able to see what their eyes are doing. Or dogs like in this picture, the Dachshund with its ears hanging down, we can't necessarily see as much as of that ear movement as we would be able to see with a dog whose ears are sticking up. Equally, if the dog has got a very sort of muscly body, we might not be able to see as much movement in the body as we could for a sort of normally muscled dog. So yes, it is very important to understand breed differences, and for instance, think about dogs that don't have tails, or where tails have been docked, and then we are unable to read a very important body language indicator. All right, and then Brendan has said, yes, learn about what to look for. Yeah, for example, listen this evening. Yes, that's great, Brendan. And changes in usual behavior, changes of habits and routine. Jeanette, your point is absolutely on point. Dogs don't eat treats when stressed. Okay, and especially, we're going to be talking to the vets about this topic as well in a couple of weeks' time. And vets often have the situation where an owner will come into the practice and say, oh, but my dog will eat these treats at home and now they don't want to take them. That is an absolute indication that the dog is feeling so stressed and anxious in that moment that food is no longer important to them. So that gives us a very good insight into their mental state at that point. Lana is saying, if you have more than 2 dogs, you miss individual needs. Yes, it can be difficult to pay attention to what is going on with groups of dogs and be responding to everybody's needs at that point. And Le's also saying why teaching observance of body language to the public in class is so important, because they do not know. Yes, indeed. And Julie saying, same as a tap out, often seen as an invite to tickle tummies. Yes, so sometimes when dogs lie down and show their belly, that's kind of like, I'm not feeling so comfortable about the situation. And Julie, I would say as well that our very sort of, how can I put it, sort of friendly breeds. So if you think about sort of maybe Goldens and Labradors, they can sometimes show this extreme, like overly, sort of boisterous, wanting to kind of interact with you, friendly behavior, which is again a little bit of an indication that they're not feeling so comfortable. Right, so let us move on to behavior as part of holistic care. Over to you, Quixie. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you very much, Aileen. I am multitasking a little bit here, so forgive me if I'm a little bit slow. So I'm going to talk about behavior as part of holistic care, just very quickly. So what is holistic care? What do we mean with that? So our concept or understanding of it is really based on what is defined for people in terms of health, the definition of health. So the definition of health as determined by the World Health Organization refers to a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it has those 3 components to it, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And this applies very much to the way that we've been talking and thinking about dogs and their well-being. In the old days, animal welfare was even defined as a state where the animals can do everything that people want of them, rather than the animals are actually experiencing physical, mental, and social well-being. So we have come a long way. So in terms of then taking those three concepts and applying them to dogs that we are talking about today, if we start off just looking at the physical health, as I say, I'm trying to multitask here, but I'm getting there. So physical health is quite obvious. It's the stuff that we go to the vet for, the vaccinations, parasite control, making sure that the nutrition for our dog is correct for that life stage. You probably are all aware that, for example, a young growing puppy needs a different type of diet to a adult or old dog, specifically. They also require general veterinary care. Because if they have an injury or a broken bone and it's painful, then they cannot be feeling great. So physical health, I think we'll all agree, I think most people will agree, is a very important part of the holistic dog care and the well-being of dogs. If we then look at the mental health aspect, in dogs, we are referring to ways that we can minimize stress and teach resilience. These concepts are very similar to those in humans. And, where we said earlier that well-being is not just the absence of fear or the absence of disease, we actually want to see our animals flourish. We want to see them live the best life, not just a good life, but the best life. And that's where we've come nowadays in science and in understanding of animals. We need to respect their emotional needs. A lot of people still don't really see that. They don't understand that dogs have these emotional needs. And then we need to satisfy their behavioral needs. It might be a dog that loves digging, or it might be a dog that really enjoys human company much more than anything else. And we need to be able to see these things and provide in those general needs, but also very much in each dog's individual need. And it's very important that we provide safety to our dogs. That's psychological safety as well as physical safety. And this is an aspect that is often forgotten when people get a dog and they don't have the right kind of property and the right kind of physical environment for the animals. If we then look at social health, here we're talking about understanding specifically the social needs of dogs. They are social animals. Being social is basic in a dog's DNA. To be able to help them, we need to be able to read their body language. We need to know how to manage social interactions. We must be an advocate for our dogs when somebody approaches the dog that is already a little bit nervous, perhaps of people, strange people. And if people then approach the dog and just want to touch it immediately, we need to advocate and say, no, please keep your distance. This dog is not comfortable with strange people. Thank you for wanting to be friendly, but not today. So we can actually, even if you think about the pandemic, and a whole lot of dogs that we have now were puppies during the pandemic, and they did not have the opportunity to go out and meet people to the extent that especially young dogs should have the opportunity to do. They could not go to puppy classes, and they have turned to a large extent into problem dogs for many people and in many instances. And I think that's a very clear indicator of how absolutely essential it is that we pay attention to these social skills. So if we then just combine all of that in one slide, we can see all the different things that I think there's something missing there, but never mind. That we need to pay attention to for the well-being of our dogs. But we should also take into account that each individual is different. So genetics play a role, temperament play a role, learned experiences up to a particular point all play a role. And that means that while there are a lot of general principles that apply to all dogs, we can never ignore the fact that each individual animal needs to be approached in a different way, in accordance with that particular dog's specific needs. So let's just think a little bit about this and have another discussion. And by the way, if you would like to speak and say something, you are welcome to raise your hand on the little icons that you get. You can just click on the raised hand, and Madeleine will see you and she will give you access to speak if you're not a very quick typist. So do we pay enough attention to the non-physical needs of dogs, the emotional needs, the social needs, the psychological needs? And if there are barriers to this, then what are those barriers to ensure that we really look holistically at the health and well-being of our dogs? What do you think? Let's see what your thoughts about this are. Okay. So ensure the environment is right, meeting their needs, allow them to express what they were born to do, absolutely. Many people do not understand that dogs differ in personality and cannot be treated the same way. Yes, only absolutely. So what are the main obstacles then? Is it a lack of knowledge of general dog owners? And if so, where could they be getting that knowledge from? I think everybody who's here tonight is converted. You know that you need to learn about these things. But what about all those other people out there that just don't know any better? What can be done to make this knowledge more accessible? Yeah, so I think Jeanette makes a very important point there about the choosing of breeds. People really still very often will go for, oh, this is such a beautiful dog. It has blue eyes and it looks like a wolf. And then they get the Siberian Husky and then complain because they have challenges with it. So definitely breed information and how to go about buying a puppy, because even the breed isn't necessarily going to give you all the information about the puppy that you're interested in. More needs to be done in terms of education. And Janine points out how this idea that dogs can't feel is a big stumbling block. And of course, the whole dominance myth, Bryn, absolutely, yes. That remains a very big topic that all of us need to talk about a lot. Yeah, people don't research, Sherry. They live in the past, absolutely, and things have changed so much. Nadine says that people probably don't have the time, to properly care. And then perhaps our education should be around, do you have everything that it takes to get a dog before people actually get the dogs? Alette mentions that people are so busy and they just can't meet the dog's needs, yes. And perhaps that is a place where this community can offer more services and help people that really are very busy to do better for their dogs. Dogs housed in a kennel environment, Jimmy, will be more difficult to care for in a holistic way. Yes, that is true. And in those sort of environments, perhaps we should be doing more to provide in those psychological needs and the social needs. And only it's about getting all the vets on board to utilize behavior practitioners. Yes, so hopefully our talk next week or the week after will help to contribute to educating vets as well. Yes, so a lot of you are saying that people don't understand dogs. They don't know how similar they can be to humans. And a lot of people see dogs as a security mechanism, and they also need to understand what the limitations are with regards to that. There are puppy and kitten startup events, Rwanda says, where pet owners are educated, and that's a great opportunity. And yes, there are quite a few veterinary practices that do try and fill that gap. And Rwanda recommends that. Rwanda is also one of our SIVA representatives, and I'm sure she'll give out her details a bit later on if you want to ask her for more information about that. And then Tia says people have different preferences and comfort levels, and we need to respect that and work with that as best as we can. Okay, well, nobody wants to say anything verbally. Okay, so let us continue then to the next section, which I will also be dealing with. But I think
just don't forget this discussion, Quixie.
Yes. Yes, we still have another discussion here. Sorry, it didn't all fit onto one slide. So just quickly, what are the biggest stressors in dogs' lives that you are aware of? Just let's get a broad idea of what people see, what people like yourselves see in terms of the stress, and then perhaps also how can we minimize the impact of unhealthy, problematic stress. Changes, yes, absolutely. Only thunder and lightning, yes, any of you that are in Gauteng, absolutely. I swear these thunderstorms are just getting worse every year. And then pets left alone outside, changes in environment, absolutely. Yes, the session is being recorded, Mumtaz. And change the environment, include exercise. Yes, where exercise is a need for an animal and it's not getting adequate exercise, perhaps not for every dog, but then definitely exercise can be increased. Isolation is extremely stressful for dogs, and this includes the isolation that a young puppy feels when it's taken to its first new home. It's left its mother and its siblings behind, and it is really very stressful. And then any situation where an animal is kept confined in a cage or something would be highly stressful. And Rwanda is absolutely right that even very small changes that seem small to us can have quite a big impact on an animal. And separation anxiety is a huge topic and a big cause of severe stress, distress in dogs. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being such good participants and being part of the conversation. So perhaps now we can continue to the physiology of pheromones. Now that we've given a little bit of a background to what dogs experience in terms of stress and anxiety, and we've mentioned pheromones. A lot of you probably haven't even heard of pheromones before. Some of you are already using them. So just to recap a little bit, pheromones are substances that are released by animals, and we're talking specifically dogs this evening, that send a message to other animals of the same species. So the picture we have here to show the communication channel between the sender and the receiver. The example here uses the bitch, the mother, who is sending this message to the puppy, and the mother releases these little particles that we cannot see, not like in the slide here. They are invisible particles that are released from her skin, okay, and the skin around the udder specifically, okay. And this is then when a female dog is lactating, she starts producing these pheromones and they reach the puppy, who absorbs it through the nose. So it's very similar to a scent, a smell, but it's very, very different too. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between scents and smells to help you understand better how pheromones actually work. So if we look at the anatomy of olfaction, and olfaction is a fancy word for smell, okay? And we look at this path from the nose to the brain, because we know that things that land up in the brain will cause a change in behavior ultimately. So what we've done here, this is not a very lifelike, correct representation of anatomy. Just look at the colors and the words. So the names on the left side just give the correct term for these parts of the anatomy that play a role in olfaction and pheromones. The blue one, if we start at the bottom of that list, is the vomeronasal organ, which is a very specialized organ that sits in the top of the dog's mouth, and we'll show you a little bit more detail in a moment, exactly where the vomeronasal organ sits. And that then processes the pheromones. If you look at the green one, the respiratory epithelium that's in the nose, in the nasal cavity. So the vomeronasal organ is just below the nose, in the mouth. The respiratory epithelium picks up smells, not like meat, coffee, perfume, and that goes to the olfactory epithelium, which sits a little bit further back in the nose, closer to the brain. Then you have the gray spot there, is the accessory olfactory bulb, and the yellow one is the olfactory bulb. They have very similar names, but they are two separate organs. And then we have the olfactory cortex at the top, which is just sort of in the front section of the brain below the eye. The last thing here is the limbic system, which is in the center of the brain, and the limbic system is responsible for processing emotions. The olfactory cortex is part of the thinking part of the brain, the cognitive part of the brain, the gray matter, and that specifically processes the scents that a dog would pick up, and the dog will then decide what to do with that scent. Whereas, as we will see in the next slide, I think we can move on. That is just to show where the vomeronasal organ sits. So that's the top jaw of a dog's mouth, okay? So it's lying on its back, and it's just showing us behind the incisor teeth. That is pretty much where that organ, the vomeronasal VNO organ, is situated. So in the next slide, we'll now see the path that is followed by scents. So they go from the nose via the olfactory bulb to the cortex of the brain, where thoughts are processed. Whereas the pheromones go a slightly different route. They are absorbed through the vomeronasal organ and go via the accessory olfactory bulb to the limbic system. And in the next slide, we can just see that combined. And then in the last slide, with all these pretty pictures, we can just go back to our original slide where we, that's just the combination. So from the mom's skin through the air, it's an aerosol, it's a fatty acid type substance, little molecules. They then end up in the vomeronasal organ of the puppy. The vomeronasal organ sends a message to the limbic system where emotions are processed, and that then results, it's in the brain now, it results in a behavioral response. So on the next slide, we can just see some examples of the behavioral response. Could be just the dog relaxing and sleeping, or suckling, and these are all positive things that are good for the puppy. So the emotional response caused by this particular pheromone that goes from the bitch to the puppy is that of safety. It makes this puppy feel safe, especially considering that they can't see or hear when they are born until they're about 2 to 3 weeks old. So they need that security from the message that they get from the mother. So if we think a little bit more about pheromones, a broader picture of pheromones, there are different types of pheromones, and we are talking tonight about a particular pheromone. But I just want to give you a broader understanding that there are pheromones that decrease arousal, so they calm down an animal, and we're talking about arousal as in excitement. It's not specifically sexual arousal, although there are pheromones for that as well. So they either decrease or increase arousal. The ones that decrease arousal are usually referred to as appeasing pheromones. They are released from skin around the mammary glands and the ears. And the specific one we're talking about today is dog appeasing pheromone, or DAP. This will cause a reduction in anxiety and fear, and it will cause a sense of safety to the puppy, whereas the pheromones that increase arousal have different functions. They do not provide this sense of safety. And on the photograph here, you can just see the green spots are places where a dog can release pheromones, and they are different pheromones from different places. And then just to again point out that pheromones are species specific. So a dog pheromone will talk to another dog, but not to a cat, for example. And then sometimes pheromones are referred to as semiochemicals, just so that you're aware of that should you do some reading up. In the next slide, we just expand a little bit on this concept of safety. So any social animal has a basic need for safety. And in dogs, this is achieved by providing a safe haven. So that's related to a place, as well as a secure base, which is related to a living individual. All right. So the secure base that a dog first experiences will be its mother. As we've explained, how the dog appeasing pheromone will make the puppy feel safe. But it's also important that the dog has a physical place where it feels safe. And in that place, there shouldn't be any harm to the dog. There shouldn't be any bad experiences. It should be a place where a dog can relax and explore, and where it feels in control. It's not the same as the safe space that is sometimes referred to when a dog is trying to escape from a negative stimulus. For example, thunderstorms. Some dogs will try and hide somewhere under a bed or in a box or any sort of place like that. That is referred to as a bolt hole. That is not a safe space. That is just a place where the dog can feel a little bit better until the scary thing has passed. Okay. And then the secure base has to be a supportive person, because once the puppy is not with its mother anymore, it still needs a secure base. And then the dog owner becomes that secure base. And if the dog owner is a responsible and understanding dog owner, they will be a positive attachment figure for the dog, and they will respect the dog's needs and make sure that those needs are satisfied. I think that we might be ready. No, we're not quite ready for the discussion yet. We are now introducing the product, Adaptil, which is a synthetic pheromone. That means the same kind of molecule that mother dog releases for the puppies can now be made in a laboratory, and it can be put into a bottle and sold to people like us. So this synthetic dog appeasing pheromone can be used to provide a sense of safety in all dogs of all ages. And we'll talk a little bit later about when it might not work and when it works best. So they send a new message from the environment. So where the puppy would have been very anxious and stressed and fearful if it didn't have access to the mother and her pheromones. The moment the mother is there with the pheromones, the message to the puppy is that it's safe now. And this is what happens to dogs in other contexts other than just puppies. So it changes the dog's emotional state in the limbic system, and that then causes the dog's behavior to change. Just again to show what the product looks like and what the name is. So you will note that Adaptil, the DAP in Adaptil refers to dog appeasing pheromone. And we will, in a moment, explain to you all the different formulations that the product is available in and how you can actually use the product. Before we get to that section that Aileen will take, let's discuss a little bit more about how the pheromones work. So what they do is they create an emotional bias. And we have a question here: are you a cup half full person, or are you more a cup half empty person? And you can maybe just give us if you're a cup half full, you can give us a thumbs up. If you're cup half empty, you can give us a thumbs down. And I think that some of us are sometimes cup half full and sometimes cup half empty people, right? Depending on the context. But what this really refers to is that when I'm a cup half full person in a specific context, I tend to experience that context more positively than the cup half empty person. So the more positive bias makes you see what's good about something, and it makes you feel better about it. Whereas the negative bias will make you feel more worried about a particular situation. So this is what pheromones do, is they create this bias that makes the environment feel better than it was before. I hope that makes sense. Can you think of how this principle would apply to dog behavior? And has anybody perhaps even seen that happen in a dog? Perhaps a dog that's been using pheromones or in another situation. Okay, thank you, Madeleine, and welcome to Willem. Dr. Willem Schultheiss from SIVA. He's also joined us. He's been traveling. And Aletta Sinfiliwayne Katz. Okay, so then it's good that we are talking about it. I'm looking also at Teresa's message about her dog that passed away. The other dog then got very, very sick, and it was quite possibly from stress. Yes, that certainly can happen. And that is that's the loss of the attachment of an important attachment figure. When the other dog in the household passes away, if the dogs were really close to each other, that could be extremely stressful, and pheromones certainly would assist in reducing that kind of stress.
Quick,
Yes,
if I
okay.
may add, it's Hanneli here.
Yes.
We've recently just had a testimonial from a client as well, where a dog was pining for a house worker that passed away.
Oh, yes.
And the dog was really stressed by this what had happened. It stopped eating. It would not basically do anything because it was pining. It would go to a room and scratch the door, and it had realized that something had gone wrong. And when they had placed an adaptal collar on the dog, the next day he started eating and he started displaying normal behavior. So it was, yeah, it was quite a good exercise or something to do.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that contribution, Annelie. I see there are some people who've used Adaptal, and Annelie very rightly points out that it must be used in conjunction with other modalities. We will cover that as well. Although there are cases that I have seen where Adaptal alone has made quite a significant difference, but it all depends on the case. It's not straightforward, and I think that is a big part of our message today. We are not saying this is the solution to every dog problem, but there are cases where just the Adaptal actually brings about quite an impressive improvement. And then Jimmy used to spray Adaptal in the dog's muzzle when you took them on helicopters. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Jimmy. So we would not recommend spraying it onto the dog itself. And we'll get to that in the next section and give you a bit more detail on that. Shannon says it could possibly swing a dog's emotional state into a better place when they're anxious, thinking about something aversive even in the absence of the stimulus. Yes, absolutely, Shannon. And grief is very much a dog's primal emotion. Yes, thank you, Alet. Shannon, did you have your hand up? Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Thank you for this lovely talk. So I've personally used, I can't recall if it was an Adaptal, a pheromone collar, but I've used them with my own dogs when I've been in a situation where I can't sort of manage the environment to avoid changes, especially if we're introducing a new dog into the household. Not all of my dogs seem to need it, but I mean, obviously there's a bit of crossover. You know, if there's one dog wearing it, everyone benefits to some degree. And I've had great success with it with my own dogs. I've recommended them to clients as well. And I find in an application where you're dealing with changes in routines, it's tremendously effective. We've actually got a move coming up in the next month. I've already ordered the dogs' pheromone collars. So I'll pop them on about a week before, because obviously seeing people in and out of the house is stressful to the dogs. And yeah, you know, I think that's, for me, the greatest benefit is when the dog, and you summed it up so nicely when you said it just swings them into a little bit more of an optimistic state of mind without sounding anthropomorphic. But it's, you know, you kind of want the dog to go, well, this is different. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. And it really seems to help in that regard. So I've used it personally, and I've recommended it to a lot of clients, and it's brilliant. It really is a wonderful, wonderful tool.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's good to hear from people who have used it. Thank you for that input. Okay, so I think we're going to look at some of your other questions a little bit later on. Let's continue to the next section, which Aileen will take. And this is also the section where we will briefly answer some of your very good questions, very interesting questions. And hopefully that will give everybody an idea of the general principles where pheromones can be used. So over to you, Aileen.
Thanks, Vicky. So we're going to look at the role of pheromones in behavior management. It's already been alluded to that sometimes it can be utilized alone, sometimes it needs to be utilized in combination with other things. So really, what can we use Aptil for? Now, some of you may have heard of Jaak Panksepp and the work that he did. You're welcome to send a thumbs up if you did. And he did very important work showing that all mammals have the neural anatomy. So they have the structures in their brain that enable them to experience some core emotions. So to our discussion earlier, the fact that, a lot of people still think animals can't experience emotions, or they don't realize that dogs can experience emotions. This is work, that hasn't yet infiltrated the public domain as well as it should have. And the core emotions that he demonstrated are the negative ones of fear, rage, and panic. And panic is also known as panic grief. So this is the emotion that is activated when the individual is separated from that primary attachment figure, that secure base that Quixie mentioned earlier. And the reason for that is because dogs, when they are born, are pretty helpless, right? Their eyes only open at 2 weeks of age. Their ears only open at 3 weeks of age. So if they get, and they can't thermoregulate, they can't find their own food. So if they get separated from the mother at that point, they are at risk of dying. So that emotion that gets generated, that panic grief, is the emotion that drives them to cry, make a noise, so that the mother goes, oh my goodness, you've fallen out of the nest, and goes and fetches them again. So it activates behavior that tries to re-establish contact with the primary attachment figure or the secure base. And you can then understand why it's also known as grief, because it's the emotion that we feel when we get separated from somebody that we have a very strong relationship with. The example that Hanli just gave now, obviously the dog had a good relationship with the person who worked in the house who then passed away. And so was seeking that person and looking for them and experiencing this emotion, a little bit of panic that now they can't find this particular individual. So the two systems where the appeasing pheromones, the dog appeasing pheromone that is present in Adaptil is more likely to be able to exert an effect are fear and panic grief, right? So as Shannon just mentioned now, all the kind of stresses in the environment, renovations, workers in and out the house, changes in the household, moving, all of those things can be stresses that create anxiety and fear. And so Adaptil is likely to be very helpful in those situations. And we can think of short-term situations like we've just mentioned that create stress, car travel, social interactions. Maybe you've got a party and you're going to have lots of people in the home. That can be very stressful for your dog. Going to the vet. Long-term situations that create stress, so separation from the secure base. When my sister lives on the property with us and she has 2 dogs, whenever she travels for more than 2 nights, I pop an Adaptil collar onto her dog because he gets very sad and stressed out when she's not around. A new environment, and then of course stresses in the environment like thunderstorms, right? We know for thunderstorm season, especially up in Gauteng, you might not always be able to predict when there's going to be a storm. So having an Adaptil collar on your dog for that period of a couple of months, and I'll get into the exact formulation of the collar now and how we would use that, but may be very helpful. So Trudy asked a question about using Adaptil and in the car and at the vet. So Trudy, sorry, I don't have your exact question here. Maybe it's on the next slide. But yes, we can absolutely use Adaptil in the car and for vet visits for dogs who find vet visits quite sort of stressful. All right, so I'm just going to check in at the chat here. And they're saying, yes, changes in routine is an absolutely positive use Adaptil. It does work. Glad to hear that, Anle. Frida saying, I have a very active dog at home. She is a wonder dog. She wants to go for a walk with the rest of the pack, but she gets overwhelmed by life outside of home life. So yes, Adaptil would be good in that scenario, Frida. Julie said, I've used calming collars on a few extra stressed dogs at kennels and had mixed results. Either worked really well or not at all. Maybe a diffuser type would be more effective. But Julie, as we mentioned earlier, every stressed dog is not the same as well, right? There could be different reasons why a dog is, some dogs may exhibit a stress response, but the stress is a very mild stress, whereas other dogs may have experiences that they've had in those types of scenarios that create a much more sort of fearful experience for them. And yeah, I'm glad you're saying Panksepp is what you need to study. He was indeed an amazing man. Do you use Adaptil prior or during a storm? Jeanette, I would say that probably using it prior to the storm would be more helpful, because once the storm is going and you already have that fear response activated, there's a lot that then has to be overcome for the dog to sort of calm down again. Whereas if we already have that support prior to the fear, the trigger, creating that fear response, it may be more effective in that regard. So let's just get into some of the other questions that you asked. Eileen said, sorry.
Yes, I was going to take these ones. So
okay, you're welcome.
But I also wanted to just on the previous question about using it prior or during. Adaptil is not a product that you can use for a specific event. It is something. It's not entirely true. The spray, for example, as Eileen said, you can use when an animal is traveling, and just for that event in the travel crate. But the collar and the diffuser, which you will describe in a moment, you can't turn them on and off. So they have to be exposed to them the whole time. So these questions are just related.
So maybe I should just cover the formulations, and then we'll come back to the questions, so that we've just covered that quickly. So yeah, the Adaptil formulations that are available, you get a diffuser, a collar, and a spray. The diffuser is a bit like those mosquito diffusers that you sort of plug in to keep mosquitoes out of your room. So a plug point, it has an element that heats up and releases the pheromone. But as Quixie explained earlier, dogs are capable of detecting that pheromone. The diffuser, if you leave it plugged in all the time and on, which you should, lasts for 30 days. And then you can purchase a refill unit that you then screw into the same diffuser unit that you've got plugged into the wall. So you don't have to buy a whole new unit every time, you just buy the refill. Collar comes in two sizes, the small to medium and medium to large, and then also junior for puppies, but that's being discontinued in South Africa. And it also lasts for 30 days. It obviously gets put on around the dog's neck, and the heat activates the collar. So it needs to be relatively tight. Sometimes see people who've put an Adaptil collar on and then it's sort of loose and, like sort of bouncing up and down the dog's neck. It's not going to be as effective then, because what we need is the body heat, warming that collar up and then releasing the pheromone. And that's really good for dogs who are going to be indoors and outdoors. So obviously the diffuser is preferable for a scenario where the dog is indoors all the time. And particularly now with winter coming up, when things are a little bit colder and we've got all our houses closed up and that, because South Africans are notorious for having our doors and windows open all the time, the diffuser is not going to work well in that scenario, because it doesn't get an opportunity to build up to sufficient levels within the environment. And then the spray, one of those bottles contains 50 uses. Now, a use is not one pump, it's about 5 or 6 pumps. And if you are utilizing the spray and you, for instance, sprayed it onto a bandana or you've sprayed it into a travel crate, that spray lasts for about 5 hours. So you then need to reapply it if you need that effect for longer than that time period. And you either spray it into the environment or onto a neck scarf or a bandana, onto blankets. You can spray it into the car for a car trip. So as Quixie mentioned earlier, we don't recommend that you spray it directly onto the dog. It is in an alcohol base, and that alcohol base can be sort of quite sharp even for our noses. So obviously it's going to be quite sharp for a dog's nose. So you just want to give it, 30 seconds for that alcohol to sort of evaporate before you then take the bandana or neck scarf and put it onto the dog, equally before you put them into the crate. So just so that you can see what the collars look like, that's what the collar looks like. And then this is the diffuser refill that you would then just put into the wall unit over here and then plug it in. So yeah, the diffusers might be very good in a sort of indoor kenneling environment like this, where the dogs are indoors primarily. Alternatively, if you've got dogs outside, indoors and outdoors, then the collar would be better for that. All right, so let's go and tackle your questions now.
Okay, thank you. So Nolene asked about dogs in kennels in an animal welfare organization context. Is there a way that pheromones can be used to lower extreme stress in recently surrendered dogs? And yes, Nolene, this is exactly where pheromones can be very helpful. It's a big change in environment. This is the underlying thing. And it is a change that causes fear and anxiety. And that is where pheromones have their best effect. You would have to look at your setup to decide which one of the formulations would work best. The collars are really good because they stay with the dog the whole time. So whether the dog is in the kennel or outside going on a walk, it will have its effect, and that's probably the best way to deal with it. But you can also have a situation where the facility uses diffusers in a building where perhaps dogs do spend a lot of time confined. So there are different ways of using it. Ushi is fostering a Chihuahua who lived for 9 years in a cage and doesn't get over his deep-rooted fear of humans. He's fine with other dogs, but literally pees himself if you just look at him or if you pick him up. So I think this dog probably needs more than just a pheromone treatment, but because this particular dog would be so difficult to get tablets into or to do stuff with, it might actually be useful to then start with the pheromones. And in this instance, perhaps the diffuser in the room where the dog is spending most of its time. Once the dog then calms down a little bit adequately to be actually handled, then other modalities can be added to the treatment plan. You don't say how long you've had the dog for and what sort of things you do with the dog. So those are obviously issues that would need to be addressed in a complete and thorough behavior consultation. And obviously the big thing is to try and avoid these situations where he wants to urinate or does urinate until he can feel safer and more confident. Michael says that we suspect our puppy was hurt by children before we got her. She goes aggro, tries to bite you when picking her up. How can we correct this? There are no qualified behaviorists in the town we stay. So Michael, most certainly this is an anxious dog. So remember that aggression is usually caused by fear and or anxiety. And the dog feels threatened when you touch her, and that's why she wants to bite you when you pick her up. So the answer is to get the dog to calm down, to reduce the anxiety that the dog is experiencing. So this would be a case where a pheromone collar would probably be quite helpful. You mentioned that there are no qualified behaviorists. Please do not discount the value of online consultations. And there's lots of people here tonight. Maybe you can make contact with somebody because, and I think it's Witbank that you're from, if I remember correctly. You should be able to still access that help that you require, even if the person can't physically be in your presence. Thank you, Aileen. I think you can go on to the next slide, which is about when a dactyl may not work.
Okay, so when may a dactyl not work? So as we said, as I said earlier, where fear or panic, grief are the underlying emotion, a dactyl is likely to be very useful. But where problem behaviors, where fear, anxiety, or distress are not the underlying emotion, a dactyl is likely not to have much of an effect there. So, for instance, destructive behavior and barking due to boredom or lack of exercise, a dactyl is not going to make a difference in that regard. If, however, the destructive behavior and barking are due to separation-related problems, then a dactyl would. And that's why it's so important to understand what the underlying emotion is, because some behaviors, like barking, can have multiple reasons why the dog is engaging in that behavior. So they can have multiple underlying emotions. And the purpose of a behavioral consultation with a qualified behaviorist is to get to what is actually causing this behavior. So, just to touch on your question, Michael, like part of the consultation is to figure out, why is your dog behaving the way that, or the puppy behaving the way that they are behaving? Other places where a dactyl may not work is, so for instance, jumping up and digging that are motivated by that exploratory drive or seeking. A dactyl is not going to make a difference there. Again, if the jumping up is as a result of anxiety, or if the digging is, the dog's way of trying to escape the property because they're scared of something, then again, dactyl will be helpful in that scenario. And when the behavior has a very strong learned component, sometimes a dactyl might not be useful. So Julie, just touching on your question about the stressy dogs in kennels. So even if we deal with the underlying emotion, so now we have a dog who is fearful or anxious and displaying a particular behavior, and we've dealt with that fear or anxiety either through medication or pheromones, the dog still has learned a particular behavioral behavior to manage their emotional state, and that can sometimes take longer to change. So that's why behavior change takes time, and why we don't always see an immediate result when we're trying to change behavior. Because even though the animal might be feeling better by whatever we're doing, no longer feeling that aversive emotion that was driving the behavior, they may still be exhibiting the behavior because they haven't yet learned a new behavioral pathway. I hope that makes sense. So Darlene is saying, I'm very interested to know why a usually adorable, lovable German Shepherd dog would viciously turn on his male pet parent whom he adores when the parent prepares to go out to work every day. He barks continuously and has to be shut out of the bedroom every time. So Darlene, again, we want to look at what the dog's behavior is and what is happening just before that. So you've mentioned it in your question as the pet parent is preparing to go to work. So obviously there's something around that, the parent's departure, or perhaps the absence, or something that they're doing while they are getting ready to leave, that the dog perceives as being quite stressful, maybe inducing some anxiety or fear. But again, this is the type of thing that a full behavioral consultation would be very helpful with, to one, understand the behavior, what's causing it. Are there other things within the environment? For instance, maybe one of the things that the pet parent does while getting ready to go to work is run the blender to make their smoothie. And I know you did say the bedroom here, you wouldn't have a blender in your bedroom, but you get my point. And perhaps that's the noise that, that the dog is quite scared of that noise. Or maybe the pet parent is using his electric shaver that's got a very sort of high-pitched noise that the dog doesn't like, and that sort of freaks him out. So that's why it's important to have a consultation with a qualified behaviorist who can look at all aspects of the dog's life and see what is contributing towards this behavior, and then what can be done to change that behavior.
Aileen, could I add something?
Yes, yeah, I was going to say, if you want to add something.
Could I just add, And this question kind of relates to when adaptal may not work, because what you're describing, Deline, could be frustration behavior, okay, in which case the adaptal won't be very effective. But also just keep in mind that this might be part of separation anxiety. I have seen reports where dogs are so set in not wanting their owner to leave that they actually become aggressive towards them. But what Aileen said earlier is extremely important. Don't make an assumption like that unless you have the full history. You know what other signs this dog shows. There will be lots of other things that this dog is doing that are not entirely normal, and that will give you a clue as to what the underlying motivation is for that behavior. So just an interesting thought related there to separation anxiety. Thanks, Aileen.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, and as Brendan's just basically said what I was, nicely summarized what I was trying to say, that once behaviors become habits, it takes a lot to change that, and they can continue despite the original cause having been removed. So exactly spot on, Brendan. And this is why sometimes behavior is so difficult to change, even though we are changing the environment or we're changing our behavior, and then we're still like, oh, my dog is still doing this. So that's why it's important to work with a qualified behaviorist who can support you through that change. So obviously, go ahead, Quixie.
There was just a question on the chat that referred to whether, let me show my face, whether a confident, happy golden retriever, I think, would meet other dogs that would be behaving inappropriately. And the question was, would these pheromones perhaps have an effect on these other dogs? And I don't know what you would say, but I would imagine we'd come back to this, but why are the other dogs behaving like that? Their issues should be dealt with in terms of what their motivation is for their aggressive behavior. So maybe Rwanda can enlighten us whether those pheromones actually really spread quite far from the dog when he's wearing a collar, but I think not. So I think that would probably not be the ideal way to use an adaptal collar. But do you have anything else to add, Aileen?
So I have actually encountered this type of scenario a few times in clinical cases where, owners have said to me, like, my dog seems to induce, an aggressive response in other dogs, and the owners will say, oh, my dog is not normally aggressive, And what is important is that apart from the adaptal collar, as Quixie mentioned earlier, dogs are producing pheromones all the time from various parts of their bodies. And one of those classes of pheromones is the identification pheromones. That's why dogs, you all know this, like to sniff each other's bums when they meet each other. Now, you mentioned that your dog is an intact male. So obviously an intact male is going to be producing, or is going to have a different class of, scent compared to a castrated male. And it may be that those other dogs, even if they're not intact themselves, may have had a bad experience with an intact male previously. So again, what has the dog experienced in their life? I've had some patients who, for instance, only hate golden retrievers because they were once attacked by a golden retriever, and they're fine with all other dogs, but whenever they see a golden retriever, they will be aggressive to them. So, maybe a scenario like that. But again, sometimes when dogs have got skin infections, that can change the pheromone profile that they present and can make them smell weird to other dogs. And in the same way that dogs who are very well socialized learn how to interact and talk to a wide variety of other dogs with all those different facial features that I mentioned earlier, upright ears and droopy ears and hair in the eyes and big pendulous lips and, small tails and big tails. part of being a well socialized dog is being able to talk to dogs that speak slightly different languages because of the changes in their morphology. And for dogs who have poor social skills, who've maybe not been very well socialized, they may not be able to accurately interpret or communicate another dog's body language signals. And so that creates a scenario of miscommunication. So again, I think that there could be a lot going on in this, in the case, in the example that you presented, Nicola. And, you know, I would say if they first come up and have sort of a good sniff of each other and then get aggressive, maybe an adapter on a bandana that you put on before you go for walks may help to give a bit of a more appeasing message to them, but I wouldn't rely solely on that as a solution. I don't know if you want to add anything else there quickly.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, all right. So just to quickly talk about pheromones versus some of the other products. Now, there have been a couple of questions in the Q&A about, what are the side effects of pheromones, and are pheromones a more natural pheromone than a chemical compound like fluoxetine? So yes, pheromones are natural and science-based. As we've indicated, there's a lot of research that has gone into them. Because they are a synthetic copy of the natural pheromone, there are no side effects associated with them. You can't really overdose on pheromones. And in fact, there is some indication that, where we need the message of safety and security to be very strong for the dog, because there's a lot of scary things in the environment, you can double up on pheromones. So for instance, the dog can wear an adaptable collar a few days before, say your dog is wearing an adaptable collar normally because they're a slightly stressy dog. Then prior to a vet visit, you can spray Adaptil onto a bandana and also put it around the dog's neck and spray it into the car. And then perhaps you go to a vet who is using the Adaptil products as well, and they've also got a diffuser running in the reception area or in the vet clinic. All of the extra exposure to the pheromones may make the message more obvious, in the same way that if I'm reading something quite intently and somebody's speaking to me and I don't hear them because I'm so focused on what I'm reading here, and they have to raise their voice to speak to me and say, hey, and then, oh, okay, I pay attention to that. Sometimes we can make the pheromone message louder by combining the different formulations and using it in that scenario. So you can't overdose on pheromones. There are no side effects associated with them. And there are many other products obviously available over the counter, things like nutraceuticals and plants and herbs and, non-species specific pheromone products. And while some of these products may have research that shows that they are useful in certain scenarios for anxiety and stress, the formulations that are available have not always been tested to the same degree and rigor that the Adaptil products have been. So just to kind of bear that in mind. And then just to quickly discuss an integrated approach to behavior management. So I think this has certainly come across in a lot of the questions that you've been asking. Behavior can be categorized in a continuum, right? So we can have normal behavior, and then we can have abnormal that sort of goes in both directions. So for instance, we have a dog who is interested in sniffing new people. That's a pretty normal behavior. Dogs experience the world through their noses, and when they meet new people, they like to smell them, to, understand more about what they've been doing and that. A dog who is fearful of, avoids new people, we might say is one type of abnormal behavior, but the person is trying to not have them jump on them and trying to turn away, and the dog is not responding appropriately to those social cues, we would say that's another type of abnormal behavior. So understanding what normal behavior is helps us to then interpret abnormal behavior and being able to recognize that. And the severity and complexity of the problem will then dictate what treatment and management is necessary. So again, a lot of the questions that you've asked this evening sound like quite sort of severe cases. A dog who's so scared that if you just look at them or go to pick them up is urinating, as Quixie indicated, that's quite a bad problem, and is unlikely to be resolved just by using pheromone products. So again, there are scenarios where pheromones alone can have a big impact on a dog's behavior and help, but there are also cases where a very complex behavioral problem. And in those cases, we want to use a combination of behavior management modalities to help that patient. So we, for instance, want to manage the triggers, teach a dog a new behavior, change the environment, enhance relaxation through using medication to reduce anxiety, and then also using pheromones. And again, we'll just reiterate the message. That's why a complete behavior consultation with a qualified behaviorist will go through all of those things and put together a treatment plan. There are never quick fixes when it comes to behavior. And while the adaptable products can be useful, for instance, even for a normal dog who maybe just gets a little bit stressed out by changes in the environment, that dog doesn't necessarily have a behavior problem. They just need a little bit of extra help coping with a perhaps stressful situation. In that case, yes, an adaptable collar or diffuser alone will help that dog. But where a dog has got a complex behavioral problem, oftentimes the adaptable products need to be combined with these other modalities in order to manage that behavior. So I hope that is making sense. And then if we just get into a few more of the questions that you have asked, Quixie, I don't know if you want to specifically deal with these.
Aileen, I think we have to move on. We have run out of time. And I think these questions were really related to the need to really find out what is the underlying issue, and then adaptal may very well be a part of your treatment plan, but not necessarily the one thing that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So aggressive behavior, not wanting to be handled, being very excited in the car, and then stressed at the vet. Those are all things that should respond with pheromones, but that might very well need other things together with the pheromones.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, we really just wanted to also, just touch on, as relating back to what Quixie said at the start, that, if we consider physical, mental, and social health, pheromones can be part of prevention in the same way that we use vaccinations to ensure good physical health. We take dogs to, or hopefully take dogs to puppy classes to help them build good social health as a prevention for preventing problems associated with social interactions. And with mental health, we can use pheromones to prevent a problem. So I understand we are running out of time. This is our last slide, and I think Hanli just wanted to quickly just discuss the perception of price and value when it comes to adaptal. And then obviously we, for those of you who would like to remain and we can have some more discussion, you're very welcome to. We're not going anywhere, but if you need to leave, we completely understand that. And as Madeleine said at the beginning, there will be a recording available. So if you want to just pop back and in the future and just watch the last little bit to hear any of the discussions, you can do that. Hanli?
Aileen, thank you very much. Yes, I just want to mention something before we look at the price. So we're concentrating on the dogs this evening, obviously, but a lot of us have mixed households. So there would also be cats, and sometimes a new cat or a new dog would be introduced into an environment. So I think it's important to remember, and you mentioned it at the beginning, that these pheromones are species specific. So if there is a cat and a dog in environment, or even going to the vet, these pheromones can be used simultaneously, and there won't be any mixed signals to the specific species. Then just looking at the prices briefly, there's sometimes a perception that these pheromone products are very expensive and then may be difficult for people to, afford. But if you break it down to daily use and the collars, for instance, that last a full month, the spray that has 50 sprays included, it basically reflects a usage of or a price of under 20 Rand a day. And if you look at like that, maybe not as expensive as perceived in the beginning when you need to buy it. So thank you very much, Aileen and Quixie, for this opportunity. I think it's been very informative.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so our last sort of discussion was just, what would you like to use Adaptil for? What are the advantages of using pheromone products, and any general questions that you may have. So while you type away, Quixie and I will answer some of the questions that have come through. Quixie has been answering your questions here. And maybe I just want to address Alette's question in the Q&A. So Alette asked, is Adaptil a more natural pheromone than a chemical compound like fluoxetine? So as I said already, Alette, pheromones are, the Adaptil products are, even though they're a synthetic copy, there are no side effects. And as far as I know, there haven't been any cases of dogs showing allergic reactions to the collars or anything like that. And I would just say that perhaps, a chemical compound like fluoxetine probably has a different need. In a case, I wouldn't necessarily replace fluoxetine with Adaptil. So if I had a dog who needed medication, I would use medication for them and perhaps use the Adaptil collar while waiting for the medication to come on board, because sometimes medications take 4 to 6 weeks before they start having a therapeutic effect. And as we've already said, they can be used in combination. So you could use medication such as fluoxetine as well as an Adaptil collar for a patient. And of course, all medications have got side effects associated with them. But a very important point that I make with my clients all the time is stress also has lots of side effects associated with it. So dogs who are continuously stressed and anxious are also going to be experiencing health effects of that. And so we shouldn't discount that when we're comparing side effects and going, well, I don't want to use medication because it might have side effects for my dog, without considering the fact that the current stress that the dog is experiencing, especially if it's long-standing stress and anxiety, we know has lots of negative health impacts. So sometimes it's better for the dog to be on medication with the few side effects that come with medication than to be left untreated in that scenario. So I hope that answers that for you. And then Brendan is saying, if used for a prolonged period, could a dog develop some sort of baseline resistance to the effect? Brendan, I think going back to the question around bias. So obviously animals are learning all the time. Every interaction that your dog has, every experience that they have, they learn something. So the emotional bias that Adaptil helps to create helps your dog to interpret ambiguous information from the environment in a more positive way. So information that doesn't necessarily already produce a negative or a positive response for the dog. By using a product like Adaptil, you can then help them to interpret ambiguous information in a more positive light. So I think from a sort of theoretical point of view, it wouldn't be possible for them to develop resistance, because they would just, they would either be feeling fine about something, and even I suppose, the pheromone products can make them feel better about something. I often say to clients, if you take a Panado, you have a headache and you take a Panado, the Panado can just stop your headache, right? It can't make you feel better than you felt before you had the headache. Whereas when we use psychotropic medication and when we use products that impact how an animal perceives the environment and responds to the environment, the same is not true. They can get better over time. they can feel even better than before you started using the product, because they're learning that this thing that used to scare me, I don't feel scared about it anymore. So now I don't have to behave in this manner, of running away or trying to bite or to protect myself. So I hope that answers your question. You're welcome to come on mic if you'd like to ask me to clarify anything. Quixie, is there anything that's popped up in the chat that you think we need to answer? Otherwise, we can finish off.
Yes, we can perhaps just answer Nicola in that it is better not to have the dog swim when it's wearing the adaptal collar. It will probably negatively affect its effectiveness. So that's one of the downsides, unfortunately, of the product.
But I think, Nicola, in that scenario, if you had the collar's got a sort of click mechanism, and you could quite easily take it off for the time that the dog is in the pool. I mean, you are saying sort of multiple times, but perhaps at night, then you could put the collar back on and the dog could wear the collar. I'm assuming they're not night swimmers. So then the dog could wear the collar overnight, and then the next morning you could take it off. What we would just recommend then is that you just pop it into a sealed, Ziploc bag or a Tupperware container that seals nicely, and then you can put it back on. But maybe in that case, the spray might be more kind of effective if you wanted to use it for a particular, having visitors over, something like that. Candace is asking, is adaptal a long-term thing? Candace, I think it depends on what you're using it for. So if you have a dog who, due to their genetics, temperament, experiences, is quite an anxious animal, and you live in an environment that you can't always control the things that makes your dog anxious, then you might want to use adaptal all the time. As I gave the example for my sister's dog, he's a very anxious dog. He's on medication to manage his anxiety, but the extra stress of her traveling is a little bit, he can't cope with that. So then whenever she travels, I put an adaptal collar on him to help him. And again, if I don't, he rips his beds up. And as soon as we put the adaptal collar on, then he stops with that. So you don't have to use it continuously, but you can use it long term, if that makes sense. So I often tell clients about the products. I want them to know about them. And then if their dog needs it in the future because they're having a new baby, or they're moving house, or they are bringing a new dog into the home, then they can use the products at that point, but maybe their dog doesn't need to use them all the time. And yeah, Quixie, sorry, I did respond to that as well. Gillian's just asking again about possible side effects. Gillian, there are no side effects associated with using the pheromone products. Quixie's beating me to the... She's providing it in a typed answer, and I'm providing the auditory component.
So then nobody can forget, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, well, our last slide was really just a summary of what we had discussed with you. So I'm not going to go through it. You can read it if you have the time. And thank you very much for your time and attention and your interactions. It's always lovely to have an audience who's so engaged and asking lots of questions. We always enjoy these types of presentations. I certainly miss in-person presentations. So online is always better when people are asking questions and engaging with us. So thank you very much for being with us this evening. And as I said, we will be around for a couple more minutes if you have any other questions that you'd like answered. But yeah, thank you and have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Aileen and Quixie, just from Siva's side as well, thank you very much. It's very, very informative, and I think everybody that joined could take something home from this. And I know you're always available for more questions if there's something that people feel that was not addressed. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Annelie.
Thank you, Hannelie.
Eileen, so we'll send out the recording tomorrow, and if you're ready, you can tell me, then I'll end the webinar.
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay,
Thanks,
good night.
Natalie.